I was cutting into a perfect ribeye on my birthday in a dining room I technically owned, and the knife slid like it was showing off. Couples were laughing. A table of kids cheered when a sparkler dessert went by. And there I was, sitting across from an empty chair, trying to look like I enjoyed the view. It was my 46th, my phone was quiet in that way that gets under your skin, and I was doing the math on how a man can buy a skyline and still come up short on company. Then a woman stopped at my table, took one look at my face, and said softly, like she was offering a lifeline, "No one should eat alone on their birthday. Mind if I sit?" She didn't make me invent pride first. She just pulled out the chair and smiled. "Elise," she said, "if this ruins your night, I'll pretend I got the wrong table." "Grant," I said, trying not to sound like a stuck door. "We ordered champagne. We didn't need the good kind you save for rescues." And she asked what I did when I wasn't pretending I was fine. I told her the truth I rarely say out loud. I build things that make a lot of money, and somehow I forgot to build a life. You know what I mean? She told me about Harbor House in Maple Ridge, a community center she runs on grit and donated coffee after school for kids, job training for adults, a pantry that empties and somehow refills. Her voice brightened when she talked about the kids, dimmed when she said the roof leaked, the rent kept jumping, the computers wheezed like old men. "What would fix it?" I asked, because sometimes the right question is the door. "50 for repairs, a year of rent, so we're not waking up scared." "And a miracle," she said, laughing, like she knew how that sounded. I could feel 12-year-old me, the kid nobody picked, nudging my ribs. "What if I help?" I said. She didn't blink, she didn't gush. She just set terms like a person who has watched donors turn communities into photo ops. No press, no naming rights, no strings. We do this with people, not to them. "Deal," I said, and for once the word meant more than the check. Next morning I drove myself to Maple Ridge because I needed this to feel human, not corporate. The building was a brick school that had learned how to keep standing hand-painted sign out front that said, "Where everyone belongs," and inside it smelled like crayons and coffee and whatever love cooks up when there's more hunger than budget. Kids with clay under their nails, seniors arguing card games like the stakes were national. A teen with a guitar case nodding at me like we'd met in a different lifetime. Elise wore jeans and a yellow sweater sleeves pushed the look of someone who leads from the front. "Ready for the tour?" she asked as if I needed convincing. We walked through rooms that had to be everything: cafeteria by noon, classroom by 3, town hall by 6, a pantry that was somehow both full and not enough, a computer lab where 6 old machines tried their best. A little guy named Jaden looked up at Elise like she was gravity. "Miss Elise, are we making clay animals today?" "We sure are," she said. Then to me, "Grant, meet our resident sculptor." "You any good with elephants?" he asked, suspicious in the way kids are with new adults who promise things. "Terrible," I said, "teach me." That was the first contract I signed that day. We made a list, the real version, not the polite one. A kitchen for classes, a music room, updated computers, a trades lab where a kid could learn plumbing and find out his hands are worth something. I carried boxes because my back needed to remember it existed. I painted until Mrs. Lee confiscated my roller and gave me a brush so I'd do less damage. Leo the waiter showed up with cousins and a toolbox the size of a small car. Marco tuned a second-hand guitar and said, "If we had a soundproof booth, I could record my mom a song." Reporters came to the reopening, and Elise pointed them to the seniors first. The mayor's aide cut a ribbon like he'd invented scissors. Dr. Patel, a family doc, shook Elise's hand and said, "I could start a clinic once a week if you can spare a quiet room and a working blood pressure cuff." We looked at each other and added clinic to the list, then went back to moving tables. You think momentum is the whole story, but Act 2 always hides a turn. Ours arrived on a Tuesday, Elise on the phone in the parking lot. Face gone pale. The building's been sold. The new owners say our lease is invalid because of electrical issues, 30 days to vacate. 30 days is what you give a tenant who can't fight back. 30 days is a dare. We hired our own inspector, who told us our wiring was cleaner than a hospital, yeah. That happened. We hired a lawyer who'd kept a bank from repoing my first factory, and he said the new owners, Apex Meridian, had a habit squeeze non-profits until they claim the land was vacant, build condos with floor-to-ceiling windows and thin walls. You can hear your neighbors' arguments through. I walked into their glass box lobby in a flannel and boots because I wasn't dressing up for a shakedown. Their counsel, Mr. Quinn, smiled with his cufflinks and said, "Relocation stipend if you vacate promptly." Relocation, where I asked. We can provide a list of comparable properties. Comparable, I repeated, tasting it. A gym without a neighborhood is equipment in a box. We all have to make hard choices, he said. Then here's one, I said. You honor the lease or we pull every one of your permits into daylight. We'll sit with grandmothers and toddlers in your lobby until your board begs for oxygen, and when council asks why you're targeting food lines and homework clubs, I'll bring your relocation list and read it slowly. He stared long enough to check for bluff. I wasn't bluffing. The next days taught me what community actually means. Mr. Alvarez, retired teacher with more phone numbers than City Hall, called 3 other neighborhoods who said, "Yep, same Apex Meridian playbook." Dr. Patel's husband worked in city planning and connected dots. Parents took shifts outside the center with signs that didn't scream. They explained Zoe designed a poster that said, "This building isn't an address, it's a promise." Marco wrote a song that sounded like hope decided to be noisy. We packed the council hearing. Mrs. Lee told them the senior lunch kept her husband's friends alive long enough to say goodbye. Jaden stood on a box so the mic could find him and said he didn't want to move his clay animals. Zoe said this was the first place she heard, "You're good at this." When it was my turn, I said what I owed the room. You can Google me, you'll find deals I won and deals I shouldn't have. People who say I saved their jobs and people who say I closed their plants. If you make this about me, you hand the developer a gift. This isn't about my money, patching your budget. Charity can't replace civic duty if centers like Harbor House matter, defend our lease review. Apex's permits tell our kids they don't have to migrate to keep doing homework. One councilman said, "With respect, you could fund this privately for years. Why should the city intervene? Because if the only way children get help is when a rich man wakes up generous, we've already decided who counts, and I'm not signing that decision." The council froze Apex's permits pending investigation. Our inspection went into the record. Affidavits from other nonprofits traced a pattern nobody could ignore. Apex blinked. 30 days became never mind. We didn't party, we exhaled. Someone brought tamales. Marco's song found a bridge. Jaden handed me a drawing of all of us in front of the building, stick figures with stupid big smiles. I put it next to a deal tombstone that suddenly looked like it was trying too hard. July brought cuts. The city aimed to slash after-school grants by 40%, which is how budgets whisper the hours kids get into the most trouble, cost too much to guard. We rallied again, but this time Elise widened the frame. We fight for everyone's funding, not just ours. We're not an exception. We're a model. Zoe testified with a portfolio and a steady voice. Marco stood with his mother and talked about what it means to have a key to a music room. When your life is full of padlocks, Mrs. Lee told them seniors deserve afternoons that don't feel like waiting rooms. I said what I'd learned: relationships are infrastructure. Cut them and you pay in other ledgers. ER visits. Juvenile court lost wages. Fund them and you get a return that never sends you an invoice because prevention doesn't brag. We kept enough for fall, not everything enough to keep the lights honest. Then came the twist. I didn't expect the National Alliance for Civic Innovation asked Elise to take our model to 10 cities, maybe 20, travel train scale. We stood in my kitchen with a pan of chicken that tasted a little like my mother's recipe, and a lot like I was trying, and we said the quiet part out loud. If you go, what happens to here? If you stay, what happens to them? I did the one thing money hates, I let go. We moved the building into a community land trust with a board that has more Maple Ridge addresses than mine. Control is the addiction wealth pretends isn't a drug. This was the antidote. When I told Elise, she hugged me in a way that felt like relief and goodbye at once. You really meant no strings, she said. I did. The day before she had to give her answer, we sat on the front steps after the last class, watched Maple Ridge carry groceries, and held the question like a fragile box, will we be okay if Purpose gets a plane ticket? We decided we'd find out. Love can commute, or it can choose a zip code. Either way, we do it on purpose. She said yes to the alliance. I said yes to staying present. Jaden and Mrs. Lee and Marco and Zoe made sure there was no room left in my calendar for self-pity. You know what I mean? So that's where I'm leaving you for now, Wong. We beat a developer who thought neighborhoods were chessboards. We put the building into the people's hands. The woman who refused to let me buy a conscience is about to train 10 more cities to build their own. And I'm here, sleeves up, learning how to be reliable instead of impressive. Was that the right call? Taking the fight national instead of guarding one corner. Moving ownership out of my hands, even if the next storm tests the roof again. Or should some things only scale locally? Tell me what you've seen where you live, the fair developers and the dirty tricks, the councils that protect people and the ones that protect projects, the communities that held the line without a donor in the wings. Drop your take in the comments, be honest. Argue with me if you need to and tell me where you're watching from. If you think stories like this should be normal instead of rare, subscribe. We've got work to do, and I'd rather not do it alone.